Hello, and welcome back to our teen lessons on Joseph. Now, we've been making these for the middle school, and I've asked the high school to join us in these. Last week, you may remember, we looked at Joseph, Genesis chapter 40. Where was Joseph last week? Well, yes, that's right. He was in prison. He met some people there. Do you remember who they are? That's probably important to an upcoming Jeopardy! Remember, at the end of this series, I'm going to have a Jeopardy! That you guys can play with each other or play with your family and your friends. Yes, he was in prison at the beginning of the story, and at the end of the story, he was in prison. We often think stories are going to have a happy ending, right? Well, let's remember a few things. First of all, Joseph had asked someone to remember him when they got out of prison. Do you remember which one it was? Yes, it was the butler or the cupbearer, yeah. And he was supposed to tell Pharaoh there was a man in his prisons that wasn't from there and was innocent. But what happens? Nothing. Nothing. And we talked about that. We talked about how Joseph is being prepared for more. And we looked at a psalm that even let us know what was coming. Well, today we're beginning to see that part of the story. So, open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 41, and let's begin. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. I'm sorry, what was that? 2 full years. How long has passed between Genesis 40 and Genesis 41? 2 full years. You know, often the Bible gives us little, what I call time signatures. I think sometimes we think, oh, the Bible's telling us all the details. No, for 2 more years, Joseph is in prison. For 2 more years, he gets up every day in prison. For 2 more years, he runs the prison. Yeah, that's his life. And some of you are in high school or middle school, and you've got 2 more years of one of those, or maybe you're closer to getting out, or maybe you're just starting, right? Time continues on, and it's the day to day. Notice we have this little story of Joseph interpreting a dream, but it's really his day to day that's showing that the Lord is with him and who he can be to those people, and the Lord continues to bless him there. So it's been 2 years since the butler has been back, and nothing. And nothing. So many times we're in such a hurry for things to happen, and we live in a very fast-paced world today, right? I mean, we can communicate with people very quickly. We can send emails and texts and Instagrams and within moments get reactions. We've got to remember there's some things that take longer. And God isn't always doing things in an instant. Yes, he can, and he does. But he also does things over time because sometimes we need time to prepare and be ready. So for over 2 full years, at least, Joseph has been running the prison. I think that's important later in the lesson. Continue to read with me. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Joseph had a dream. Excuse me, not Joseph, Pharaoh. Obviously, I'm not paying attention there. That Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the banks of the river. So 2 sets of cows coming up out of the river, that's Pharaoh's dream. And the ugly and gaunt cows, that means the skinny cows, right, ate up the fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. Pharaoh has this dream about cows, right, coming up out of the river, probably the Nile, right? You guys have studied Egypt. And the skinny cows come up and they eat the fat cows. And Pharaoh wakes up. What an odd dream, right? He slept and he dreamed a second time. Again, have you noticed we've been having these things of 2 dreams? Joseph had 2 dreams. The butler and the baker, 2 guys, they each have a dream, 2 dreams. And now Pharaoh's going to have 2 dreams. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. All right, in both dreams, there's fullness and there's want. And want takes over the fullness. Did you notice that? There were these healthy cows, and who eats them? The thin cows. There's this beautiful heads of grain, and there's kind of some ugly, not so grown heads of grain. Looks like they're kind of dried up, and they eat the other grains. Now again, that doesn't make sense. Grain doesn't eat grain. Cows don't eat cows, right? It's a dream. But Pharaoh was troubled by this dream, especially since they seemed so similar. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. Again, we'd probably had troubled dreams before. And he sent and he called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. So Pharaoh is used to maybe having a situation like this where he calls together those that are part of his inner circle, and he says, hey, what does this mean? And they talk it among them, and they don't know. Remember, Joseph has said, I know who interprets it. God interprets dreams. Then the chief butler, oh yeah, remember that guy? Remember the guy who 2 years ago was in prison with Joseph? Spoke to Pharaoh saying, I remember my faults this day. Now notice how he starts this conversation. He's having to bring up something from 2 years ago. And he doesn't really want to remind Pharaoh, right? I don't know. We don't know the situation. Pharaoh was just unhappy with him, put him in prison. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. Wow. He mentions the baker, right? The baker is the one who doesn't survive the story. We each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his dream. We dreamed something and it came true. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there. Now, remember, that was 2 years ago. Joseph's not getting any younger. He's in his 20s at least by this time. A servant of the captain of the guard. Now that's interesting. A servant of the captain of the guard. Joseph was a prisoner too. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dreams. And it came to pass just as he interpreted for us. So it happened, he restored me to my office, and he hanged him. He says, Pharaoh, I kind of know. Remember we talked about the butler and the cupbearer, a very close position to the Pharaoh? And he says, I do know somebody who might be able to do it. He was able to interpret my dream and someone else's dream. He's not from here, and he's a prisoner. I mean, this is shaky, right? You know, if the wise men can't do it, why can this guy do it? Well, that's kind of the situation here. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. Yeah, when Pharaoh speaks, people move. And he shaved, changed his clothes, and came to Pharaoh. I love this scene here, right? They're not going to send a prisoner into Pharaoh looking all prisonery, whatever that was, right? They're going to clean him up. They want Pharaoh to think the prisons look good. Pharaoh has called for this man. He must be important, right? They're going to treat Joseph in a different way, maybe, than some people saw him. Imagine the guards who had been there the whole time. They've never been called by Pharaoh, and this guy is? What's up? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not me, God. Now, I want you to hear that. You've had Egyptian history, a lot of you. In the curriculum here, in our state, in 6th grade, you study ancient civilizations. I want you to look at that sentence real carefully. It is not in me, God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. What did pharaohs think they were? They thought they were gods. And now Joseph is saying, in front of a culture and a person who may think of himself as a god, there is a God who will interpret your dream. In other words, there's someone bigger than you. There's someone better than you. There's someone smarter than you. Wow. Man, that's speaking in boldness, isn't it? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. These were some ugly cows. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as in the beginning. So and in that, they didn't get any fatter. They didn't get any fat. And so that's what Pharaoh tells him as part of the dream. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 heads withered, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. He fills in Joseph on the dreams, tells him what the dreams were, and says, so far, no one has been able to interpret this. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. Your dream is the same dream. It just was shown to you in two different ways. Anyone ever have to explain to you something maybe one way and you didn't get it, and they explained it somewhere and went, I got it. God has shown. Now again, God has shown Pharaoh. Remember how he's hearing this. God has shown God? What? God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. So there is somebody above Pharaoh who knows the future. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one, and the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years. All right, so 7 and 7. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. God is showing Pharaoh what God is about to do. Not what Pharaoh has control of, not what the gods of Egypt have control of, but what Jehovah God has the power of. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise. So there's going to be 7 years coming up. I'm going to tell you what the harvest are going to look. They are going to be plentiful. They're going to be wonderful. But after 7 years of that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. The harvest will not be good. It will be a struggle. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten. The famine's going to be so great that they will forget the 7 good years. You know, I'm filming this in the time of a pandemic, and maybe we have forgotten how good things used to be, right? We might not even notice them as good. Maybe you actually begin to miss school near the end. And maybe it wasn't your school you missed. Maybe you missed your friends. Maybe you missed your teachers. Maybe you missed relationships. Maybe you forgot how much church, coming together as the body of Christ, meant to you. Your Bible class meant to you. Maybe you forgot how nice it is to go somewhere, to a restaurant. I mean, we took that for granted, right? We just went out and we ate all the time. And now all of a sudden, we have almost forgotten, right? That's how bad the times are. And so right now we're really in this really small time of our life, and maybe we have forgotten how good we had it. Well, maybe this is a time to thank God for the good that we had, to thank Him. And so he says that's what it's going to be like. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Again, he keeps mentioning God to Pharaoh. I would love to have seen the faces of the other people in that room. Right? I mean, how were they hearing this? How were they seeing it? How was even Pharaoh here? That there was someone bigger than him who knew what was coming in the future that their leader, their God, did not know? Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. Joseph says, you know what you need to do? You need to find somebody to set up a program. And during those 7 years, you need to take 20% of everything that is grown and store it to plan for the future. You know, there's been a lot of talk during this time. I'll just talk to you guys as teens for a moment. There were a lot of people who could never imagine they would be out of work for a month or 6 weeks or maybe now 2 months. And they didn't have any savings. I think a lot of us are learning that there are times that come up where we have to have some reserve, right? And maybe some people have had some savings but have gone through that. I'll just go ahead and tell you, historically, good and bad times come. And we've got to be prepared for both. And so he says, to be prepared, we're going to take 1/5, 20% of everything that's harvested and save it. They're going to do that for 7 years. All right? And let them gather all the food of the good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of the Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. So they're going to store up grain for what might be coming. Now remember, we know God. We know how he works. Joseph knows God. But he's trying to convince a godless people that they're going to give away some of their food now so they'll have it for later. Remember when your parents are trying to teach you to save your money? And you get money for your birthday or for Christmas, and you want to go spend it all, and they say, oh, you better save some of that. Maybe they say, like, wait for a rainy day. Well, because they know things happen. They know things come up in our lives that we didn't plan and we didn't expect. And so they're going to have to save this, and then they're going to have to wait and see, does it happen? Do they have the 7 years? Did they save it for no reason? Could they have gone ahead and eaten it then? Well, let's see what happens. Then that food shall be reserved for the land for 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. You're going to do this so that you can survive the 7 years of famine. Yeah, it's going to take some pre-planning. Are you doing any pre-planning? Or maybe it's summer. Maybe some of you have summer reading. Yes, for next year. We're already thinking about next school year, right? We just got out. Yeah, but you're planning. Maybe you did a schedule before you left, so you knew what your classes were next year. Maybe some of you are beginning the college process, right? Yeah, we're planning. Adults, hopefully, if you're listening to this lesson, maybe some of you, what are you planning for? Many of you never plan for what we've just been through. But are we prepared when the unexpected comes? Are we prepared when God asks us to do the unexpected? So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Did you hear what Pharaoh just said? Pharaoh recognized that Joseph, a prisoner, a foreigner, had the Spirit of God. I think that says a lot about how Joseph carried himself, about how Joseph showed him. Would people say that about you? Would they say that person has the Spirit of God? I wish that as Christians and as teens, as adults, we were better examples and people saw that we lived our lives differently. But by the things we choose to participate in, by our actions towards others, even those that society say aren't worth investing in, or by our words, or the way we react to things. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Do what? Can you imagine the eyes and the faces of the other people in that room? Pharaoh has just taken a guy that he just met out of prison. He interpreted a dream, and Pharaoh says, you are so wise. I want you to run this agricultural program. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you authority to do it, and there's not anybody except me greater. Whatever you need, you go do. You remember last week when we talked about Joseph runs a household. Joseph runs a prison. Now he's going to run a country. Whoa. Right? God didn't take him at 17 and say, I'm going to let you run a country. He wouldn't have been prepared for that. But I'm sure when Joseph was in the pit, he wasn't saying, oh, I'm in a pit because one day I'm going to run a country. Oh, I'm in a prison because one day I'm going to run a country. No, but God was preparing him in ways he couldn't imagine. Maybe in middle school and high school, you're taking some tough classes. And you're being prepared for things that you can't imagine. Sometimes we say, well, when will I use this stuff in the real world? How do you know? God isn't making you or asking you or taking you on a journey because he knows you are going to use that stuff in the real world in ways you can't imagine. As a mom or as a dad, as a missionary, as a deacon, as an elder, as a Sunday school teacher, whatever it is, the job you may have may take you somewhere where you get to strengthen a church, start a church. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Wow, Joseph has been on a journey, hasn't he? Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. You know how many people would have loved to have ridden in the second chariot? To have been right there by Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, you're going to see there's probably going to be some problems here later, right? Not everyone's going to like Joseph. Not everyone's going to like that he has been put in charge of this. And they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Wow, Joseph has come a long way. Remember, he was one of the younger brothers in his family. This would never have happened had he stayed at home. Joseph had older brothers who were going to get the birthright and the blessing. But Joseph now finds himself in a place of prominence. Is it because of Joseph? Is it because Joseph is so awesome or so good? Or is it because of those verses we looked at several lessons ago? The Lord was with him. Recognizing that the Lord is with us while we're growing up, preparing us for what he's got. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am your Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Did you see what just happened here in the story? What happened here in the story is that Pharaoh has just made Joseph in charge. Did you catch it in the last? He gave him his signet ring. Well, what did that mean? It's basically like his credit card. It's like the Pharaoh's signature. Joseph could walk in somewhere and say, "I'm here to do this or to have this done." And they say, "Who made you in charge?" And he said, "Look at the ring. Look at," and they say, "Oh, Pharaoh's ring. This man is a representative of Pharaoh," right? And Pharaoh called Joseph's name. Oh, he's going to get a new name. We've seen this before in the Bible, haven't we? We've seen that names have been changed. Well, he's no longer going to be called Joseph. He's going to be given an Egyptian name, right? And his name is going to be Zampeth-Paneah. And he gave him as a wife. Joseph got a wife out of this deal. I don't know that Joseph was looking for one, but he gets a wife. Asnath, the daughter of Potparai, priest of On. Now, isn't that interesting? Joseph gets a wife from a priest. Now, this is not a priest of God. This is a priest of a foreign god, right? Of another god. And they're going to come together. I wonder what Joseph told her, about his God. What do you tell people that you might be in a relationship with about your God? Do you let them know that church is important to you, that worship is important to you, that God is important to you? If they're not a believer, do you bring them to activities? Do you show them that part of your life? And then when they learn about that part of your life, do they see that part of your life in their daily walk with you? I would love to have seen these conversations. Remember, she grew up in a land of multi-gods, and she was marrying a man of one God. You, as you grow up, will meet people who have never heard of God, who have never heard or read the Bible, who don't know the stories you know. And you may lead them through a long process and conversation, and they may become believers. You look at verse 46. Did you see it? Joseph was 30 years old. The last time the Bible told us how old he was 17. 17. He's now 30. Everything that we've been talking about has happened in what? A 13-year period. The pit, the Potiphar, the prison has all been in 13 years, and now he finds himself. What's God been doing? Training him. You ever thought about how long you're in school? Most of you have been in school, maybe it's kindergarten, all right? If you start in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, you're in school about 13 years. It's a training time, right? Some of you will choose to go on to trade school or get a vocation, a job, or go on to college. It's still a training time. It's training for what's coming next. Joseph has been in training for this very moment. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, in the 7th plentiful year, we've just jumped ahead 7 years. In the 7 plentiful years that the ground brought forth abundant, so he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. 7 years. He gathers grain. Every city stores grain for this famine coming. He has the ability to do this because of the power of Pharaoh. And to Joseph were born 2 sons. Wow. In this time period, Joseph has a family. Before the years of the famine came, who Asnath, the daughter of Potparai, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. His firstborn son means that God has blessed me so much, I have forgotten what came before. I've kind of let that go. I've moved on. Sometimes we hold on to things way too long, don't we? And that happens a lot in middle school or in high school. We're mad at somebody because they hurt our feelings or they made fun of us or maybe they even bullied us. But here he says, I'm going to let that go. I've got to move on. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. He names his second son. He says, wow, coming to Egypt has been a blessing. Now, if we had asked 17-year-old Joseph in that pit or in Potiphar's household or later in the prison, hey, is this a great land? He probably would have said no. But God showed him that he was being prepared for these things. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. Why did Egypt have bread? They had prepared. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. They cried to their king, feed us, feed us. Some of you will study in history later that when people do not have food, there are riots. Some of you will study the French Revolution, for instance. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, do. The famine was over all the face of the earth. It's not just Egypt, but Egypt's prepared, right? And Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all the lands. Have you ever wondered how Egypt got so rich and powerful? Because they had the product that everybody wanted, and it was grain. I think that's important. We see all those Egyptian treasures, all that gold and all those buildings, and we think, how did they have all this stuff? I think this is kind of a clue here. People will be willing to give anything away to eat. And so whatever the price of food was, people were willing. And so Egypt became immensely wealthy during this time. Why? Because they had prepared. So, what is our application here? I think one thing we need to remember, God is over all nations. I'm a history guy. But God sometimes is using nations to write a history. And in this case, he's using Egypt. God is determined and has practical actions, okay, that come in our lives. And keep trusting God even if people let you down. Yeah, the butler, he goes back, doesn't mention him for 2 years. People are people. We're human beings. We make mistakes. People are going to let you down, but God will prepare you. Remember, God is sovereign over the nations. It says in Acts, and he made from one every nation of mankind to live all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and boundaries and their habitations. You ever think that God uses history, that God is forming a story so that he can be glorified? Isn't that the whole story of the Bible? From Genesis all the way to Revelation, God is writing a story. The first few books of the Bible are history, right? They're the record of God dealing with mankind as the story unfolds. Romans says it this way, let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Remember Pharaoh, in his culture, he thought he was God, but Joseph has to come to him and say, nope, there is someone who knows more than you, who is God, Jehovah God. God's determination, says it in 2 Timothy, for this reason I endure all things, for the sake of those who are chosen, that they also may obtain the salvation which is in Christ Jesus, and with it eternal glory. Endurance. Hanging in there. Joseph didn't quit. He got up in that prison. He did his job every day. He did it every day. You guys go to school every day. You do your homework every day. Understand God is using that to grow you. And he kept trusting in God. Psalm says it this way, in God, whose word I praise, in God I have put my trust, I shall not be afraid. What can mere man do to me? What can people do to you? It's God who judges you. It's God who you better keep in good spirits and on your side. It's God's word you'd better follow. So, that's where we leave Joseph. Can you believe it? From prison to pinnacle. That's where we see him this week. Yeah, isn't this story exciting? Well, I'm excited to share more of it with you next week. So keep following these lessons. Hang in there. Hope you're enjoying your summer. And most of all, have a blessed day.